Everyone. We'll wait a few seconds and then we will begin. Good morning and welcome to the State and Federal Programs Directors Meeting. As we wait for everyone to join us this morning, let's look ahead at the season of spring. What is your favorite springtime activity? Is it picnicking, camping, gardening, viewing the cherry blossoms, flying a kite, hiking, reading, not looking forward to the springtime, or spring cleaning, or not looking forward to spring cleaning? So what as we wait, what are some springtime activities that you look forward to? And place them in the chat. Ah, yes, the cherry blossoms. So beautiful. All right, activity of golf. Great. All of the above. Camping, gardening, hiking, spring cleaning. I'll have to take note of who says that so I can hire you. Yes, watching baseball. Oh, great. Yes, the cherry blossoms in DC are just spectacular. Okay, well, great. Well, welcome today to our meeting. To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat and it will take you to our Canvas page. The presentation can be accessed through the icon shown here. We have the agenda and resources available as well. And just so you know, we are recording today's workshop and we will be posting the link here. Once we have we complete the Q&A from the questions placed in the chat, we will also post it here as well. We will also email you a copy of it too. Today we have a very full agenda and we will start off with an update on the Comprehensive Support and Improvement CSI and additional targeted support and improvement ATSI. And then we'll look at the federal program monitoring, which will focus on the school support and improvement instrument, which is SSI, that covers CSI and ATSI. Then Debbie and Augustine will share the CDE's templates for school plans for student achievement, the SIPSAs. There's some new posted sample templates. So they'll take us through those samples of the school-wide plan, the CSI and ATSI plan. Then we will have the LCAP update that will highlight the equity multiplier, the CSI prompts, the metrics. Then Rachel will remind us on the consultation requirements for equitable services. That time is coming fast approaching. And then lastly, we'll end with some reminders, specifically on revised capital expenditure, pre-approval application, and some other upcoming deadlines. As usual, please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any simple questions as they come in. But we will follow up with written responses to all the questions that are placed in the chat. And we will email those to you as well as posting them on our Canvas webpage. So let's get started. We're going to talk about the CSI and the ATSI. The 23-24 ESSA assistance data file is now posted on CDE's website and is located at the link shown here. The files that you'll find here show the school support determinations that were made for CSI based on low graduation rate, and CSI low performing, and ATSI. The 2023 dashboard technical guide for the ESSA school support determinations is also posted and available for download at the link at the bottom of the slide. The California dashboard is used to determine a school's eligibility for CSI based on either low graduation rate and not less than the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. Schools are now eligible for CSI once every 3 years. The new cycle began with the 2023 California dashboard, but schools identified for CSI do have the ability to exit CSI status annually with the release of each dashboard thereafter. So the next entry cycle will take place following the publication of the 2026 dashboard. So that's new because now we have consistent data following the pandemic. In accordance with ESSA, schools are eligible for CSI when they meet the criteria in one of the following two categories. Again, CSI low graduation rate or CSI low performing. From the 2023 California dashboard, the CSI low graduation rate consists of schools that have a 3-year graduation rate that is below 68%. This graduation rate criteria applies to both Title I funded schools and schools that did not receive Title I funds. In addition, schools must have graduation rate data for 2021, 2022, 2023 in order to be eligible for support in this category. For CSI low performing, this consists of schools that receive Title I funding for the 2022-23 school year and are the lowest performing based on the 23 dashboard data and must meet one of the eligibility criteria that are shown here, which are the first criteria might be all reds in the indicators or all red indicators except for one indicator of another performance color. The third way is 5 or more indicators where the majority are red. So if you have 3 that are red, then that's the majority. And then also for this year, the college and career indicator will only report on status level on the 2023 dashboard. So as a result, a status level of very low would be used as a proxy for red in the CSI low performing. And then, so if a school is among the lowest performing 5% of Title I fund schools, then they become eligible for CSI. And so as schools are identified for CSI, these CSI schools are eligible to apply for CSI grant funds. The CDE launched the CSI LEA application for funding on February 12th. And I think I am missing a slide. So I am going to go back to the ATSI. So if you could go back to the slide. So for ATSI, the determinations are made after the CSI low performing and CSI low graduation schools have been determined. The ATSI eligibility is based on student group performance and uses 2 years of dashboard results. So it will be the 2022 and the 2023 dashboard. And the student groups that are used for this ATI determination are stated here. And so you can see all of the student groups. Additionally, the same exit criteria for CSI low performing applies for ATSI, but at the student group level. And so just a reminder, for CSI, you are eligible for funds, but if your schools are identified for ATSI, funding is not available for ATSI eligible schools. And so speaking of funding, school identified for CSI are eligible to apply for the CSI grant funds. CDE launched the CSI LEA application for funding on February 12th and held a webinar last Tuesday, February 13th. The application for funding is due on March 4th, and the subgrant for funding that will begin on March 18th. So what this means is that on March 18th, this is the first day that you can begin utilizing the new CSI funds and expend them to support the 24-25 CSI plan development and the subsequent implementation. CDE expects the CSI LEA final allocations to post sometime in April or May of this year, 2024, as they have in the past years. Remember, again, CSI funds can only be spent at the CSI schools or on behalf of the schools that are eligible for CSI. So for LEAs that retain these funds at the district level, it is extremely important to remember that these funds cannot be used district-wide or for non-CSI schools, and that includes ATSI schools. You cannot use these funds at the ATI schools. So looking forward to June and July, LEAs will need to report on the use of the CSI funds. CSI will host a CSI LEA reporting webinar sometime in mid-June 2024. The next reports will be submitted anytime between July 1st and the 31st using the Grant Management and Reporting Tool, or GMART, as it's known, for the next fiscal year of the 23-24 funds, along with reporting on the grant management report for the 22-23 fiscal years. So it kind of reminds me of the CONAP, where you're reporting this year and the previous year. CDE has created this visual representation, and it is available for you. I believe we posted it, and so you can download this for your use on the CSI LEA planning and reporting timeline. The new timeline begins in March of 2024, or if you look at the blue months, which is within the 23-24 school year. LEAs will have had their applications for funding approved by then, and the subgrant will begin. At this time, LEAs would start or continue with their CSI plan development and can begin expending their CSI funds as shown in the first performance period to support its development. After July 1st, or in the orange months, CSI plan development should be coming to a close to ensure that the CSI plan implementation can start at the beginning of the 24-25 school year. This timeframe will also encompass performance periods 2 and 3 and their accompanying grant management reports. As the subgrant begins to wind down in July of 2025, or in the green months, as you can see here, LEAs should be preparing for summer closeout and finalizing their expenditures for the September 30th, 2025 end date. The final grant report shown in red must be completed no later than October 31st of 2025. We have provided the following resources, and here you can find the links for the frequently asked questions and the dashboard technical guide. Also, your LEA's preliminary allocation on the CSI LEA fiscal information webpage, and also information on the CSI authorized use of funds. For those of you that are new to CSI, you can find all of these resources at these links to CDE's webpage. We want to invite you to our own LACO LCAP State and Federal Program Units CSI ATSI workshop. It will be held on Tuesday, March 19th at 10 a.m. And here we will go in depth on CSI and ATSI and all the legal requirements. Today, what you're going to hear is a lot about CSI, but it's really about how it all links together. This is today's workshop or meeting is a foundation for what you need in order to go deeper into the legal requirements of CSI. It's more about the how do you do it. Okay, so now moving on. Today, we are going to focus on the FPM update on the School Support and Improvement FPM instrument. During an FPM review, CSI and ATSI are monitored by two separate offices that work together. So the two offices are the Title I Monitoring and Support Office, often known as TIMSO, and the School Improvement and Support Office, which is also known as the CISO, will provide technical assistance, and in addition to monitoring the implementation of the CSI and ATSI legal requirements. The TIMSO office is responsible for conducting the FPM review for the Title I funded programs. So that would include the CSI and the ATSI review. And so the FPM reviewers will use the school support and improvement instrument, also known as SSI, to review the legal requirements for CSI and ATSI. Once an eligible LEA has submitted their application for CSI funding and has received the approval, then the CISO will take, well, the supports will kick in. And so the CISO office supports the apportionment process, monitors the use of the CSI funds in the GMART, and also offers technical assistance to districts in regards to the fiscal aspects of the CSI funds. The School Support and Improvement Program Instrument, again, often called the SSI FPM instrument, covers the review of schools that are identified for CSI, TSI, and ATSI. There are 6 items in this SSI instrument, and so if you can see here, SSI 1 reviews the school site activities for all schools that have been identified for CSI, TSI, and ATSI. And then items 2 through 6 apply only to the LEAs who have accepted the CSI funds. And so these items for review are the for the CSI funded activities, and they're basically the same fiscal items that are reviewed for the other federal programs for fiscal review. So they're going to look at the allocation and reporting, the allowable use of funds, the supplement not supplant, the time and effort, and lastly, your LEA equipment inventory. So if we take a closer look at SS1, which is the school site activities, and because this applies to all schools identified for CSI and ATSI, these schools must work with their educational partners, and that means the principals, the other school leaders, the teachers, the parents and guardians, and other family members. And they need to work together to locally develop and implement a CSI or ATSI plan for the school to improve student outcomes. The CSI and ATSI have specific legal requirements that must be included in their plan. And so CDE has released and posted some revised SIPSA templates, including the SIPSA for if you're going to embed or use your SIPSA to include the school improvement CSI plan in it, as well as ATSI. So that's been newly posted. And so we're going to move on as Debbie and Augustine will explain these revised SIPSA templates.
Great, thank you, Adrienne. So today we're going to, as she said, we're going to go over the revised plans, but right now I'm going to just go over a little background, next slide, on the SIPSA. And so per ESSA, a school that operates a program that requires a school plan for student achievement or SIPSA will also establish a school site council. So we're sharing this information with you regarding the SPSA because the state has developed this new template. And even though the legal requirements have not changed, nor is it required that you use this new template. However, we want to advise you that the new template does ensure that you meet the legal requirements of SIPSA. Next slide, please. And so California's ESSA state plan presents an opportunity for schools to innovate with federally funded programs and align them with the priority goals of the school and the LEAs, and meeting the requirements of the state LCFF. And so both the LCAP and SPSA are more than just documents or a plan. Remember, these are a process that takes the LEA and the schools through the cycle of continuous improvement. Next slide. So when to develop a SPSA? Per Ed Code 64001, an SPSA is required at a school that operates this, programs funded through the CONAP and that are meeting the school Title I school-wide program. They must develop the SPSA. This is the only program funded through the CONEP that requires a plan. LEAs may also require that its schools develop a SIPSA. For example, if a district has some schools that are Title I and some that are not, the district may ask that all of the schools develop a SIPSA regardless of their Title I status. And lastly, schools identified for CSI, TSI, or ATSI under ESSA are required to develop and implement school improvement plans per Education 64, Ed Code 64001. SPSAs may serve as the school improvement plans that are required under the federal law. Next slide, please. So here we have a sample SPSA timeline. So there is no required timeline for the SPA development and approval. However, an ideal timeline would be one in which the SPSA developed and approved in the spring of the previous year, so that the plan is in place and ready to be implemented by the start of the school year. So in this sample on our slide, the timeline, you can see that the implementation and monitoring of the current plan begins at the start of the school year and continues throughout the year. And then the planning and development of the 24-25 plan would begin now in winter and spring, with the plan being approved by SSC and local governing board by June. We know that many LEAs have shifted to a spring cycle for the SPSA development and approval process to align with their LCAP development process. But there are also some LEAs that have a falter or winter SPSA cycle. So for LEAs with a fall or winter SPSA cycle development cycle, the important thing to remember is that schools must have an approved plan in place in order to spend Title I funds. And another important thing to remember is that if you use your SPSA, if your SPSAs are developed and approved based on preliminary Title I allocations or budget estimates, which most LEAs do, then your plan will need to be revised to align with the final CONAP allocation. In a typical year, these amounts are usually available in January or February with the winter CONAP. And one more thing, if you're using the SPSA for school improvement plans for CSI, ATSI, or TSI, these plans are expected to be in place by the first day of the academic year. Next slide. So from Ed Codes 52060D and 52066D, the SPSA must be based on an analysis of verifiable state data consistent with all state priorities and informed by all local indicators. The LEA's LCAP identified goals from all applicable state priorities and expectations of the metrics and actions should align, and school level goals should also align with the LCAP. This helps to ensure that both the LEA and school sites are working in tandem to meet the same expectations and goals and meet the state priorities. Next slide. The LEA's LCAP identified goals from all applicable state priorities should be aligned with the LCAP, and this helps to ensure that both the LEA and school sites are working in tandem. The SPSA planning process supports a cycle of continuous action and reflection and improvement. Next slide. The SPSA planning process in that cycle of continuous improvement there is a requirement to develop and annually review the SPSA, establish an annual budget, and make modifications to the plan that reflect the changes needed and in the priorities as applicable. The SPSA involves a continuous development of implementation and monitoring cycle. So the graphic here offers a 7-step process in developing and annually reviewing your school plan. The process the school puts into motion alongside the school site council and ELAC, if required, develops an effective school plan that advances student achievement and improves academic outcomes. The 7 steps are as following. First, you analyze student achievement data with your educational partners. You secondly measure the effectiveness of current strategies and practices. You identify goals and key improvement areas. You will define your timelines, the personnel and expenditures in order to meet those goals. Then you recommend the SPSA to the local governing board or body for approval. Then you implement your school plan for student achievement. And lastly, you're going to monitor the implementation and adjust as needed. Again, this was a quick overview of that SPSA process, but you can see on our link here, at the bottom of the slide, we have a detailed workshop that we presented in the fall that you can refer back to with more details of each of these steps. And now Augustine's going to take over and talk about the slides, or excuse me, the template.
Good morning. Thank you, Debbie, and happy Thursday morning, everyone. So in this next series of slides, we're going to take a look at CDE's latest CIPSA templates. The CDE has developed CIPSA templates that have completed consistent with the provided instructions and, of course, implemented with fidelity, meet all federal school planning requirements. There are now 3 CIPSA templates. There's the CIPSA only, the CIPSA for CSI, and the CIPSA for ATSI templates. We've added a link to each template on this slide for your reference. Now, it's important to note and restate, the CDE does not mandate the CIPSA template or any other school level planning template. However, like stated at the onset, these templates, when completed consistent with their instructions, will meet all federal planning requirements. And furthermore, schools continue to have the flexibility to use a different template to complete the CIPSA requirements and the flexibility to address CSI and ATSI requirements within the CIPSA template. If an LEA elects to use its own template for school improvement planning, it must ensure that its template and process addresses all federal school improvement planning requirements for CSI and ATSI as applicable to the school. Please note that California will not determine school eligibility for TSI in 23-24. To assist LEAs in using an alternative template, the CDE has these linked resources to ensure federal planning requirements are met. So in summary, the CDE has updated its CIPSA templates to include streamlined prompts with minor language adjustments to align with the LCAP terminology while still meeting those ESSA requirements. A comprehensive needs assessment section added to better align with the LCAP template and provide an area for schools to document their needs assessment process and results. And separate templates for CSI and ATSI with instructions to help clarify the federal requirements based on the type of ESSA school support category. So let's take a look at the CIPSA only template. The CIPSA only template consolidates all school level planning efforts into one plan for programs funded through the CONAP, pursuant to Ed Code Section 64001 and the Every Student Succeeds Act. This CIPSA only template is intended to be used by Title I and school-wide program schools. However, non-Title I schools also have the option to use this template. Again, this CIPSA only template is not required for other state funds, but may be modified to meet the school's needs. The CIPSA only template contains 6 sections that are necessary for meeting school-wide program planning requirements. Now, for those of you who are seasoned vets with the CIPSA, this rundown of the section will serve as a refresher. And for those of you who might be new to the CIPSA world, welcome, and consider this a brief introduction to the work at hand. So we start with the plan description. Here, we briefly describe the school's plan to effectively meet the ESSA requirements in alignment with the LCAP and other federal, state, and local programs. Educational partner involvement. It's the ongoing annual process used to involve advisory committees, parents, students, school faculty and staff, and the community in the development of the CIPSA and the annual review and update. Comprehensive needs assessment. When completing this section for a school-wide program, the school shall describe the steps it is planning to take to address the areas of low performance and performance gaps to improve student outcomes. Goals, strategies, activities, and expenditures provide a description of the annual goals to be achieved by the school. This section also includes descriptions of the specific plan strategies and activities the school will take to meet the identified goals, and a description of the expenditures required to implement the specific strategies and activities. Annual review. Here, we identify any material differences between what was planned and what actually occurred, as well as the significant changes in strategies, activities, and/or expenditures from the prior year. This annual review and analysis should be the basis for decision-making and updates to the plan. Finally, budget summary. In this section, the school provides a brief summary of the funding allocated to the school through the CONAP and/or other funding sources, as well as the total amount of funds for proposed expenditures described in the SIPSA. The budget summary is required for schools funded through the CONAP, but note if the school is not operating a Title I school-wide program, this section is not applicable and it may be deleted. So now that we've reviewed the required sections of the SIPSA only template, let's dive right into the SIPSA for CSI template. The SIPSA for CSI template and instructions are intended to be used for meeting CSI school improvement planning requirements. LEAs with schools that meet the criteria for CSI may only use school improvement funds at or on behalf of schools eligible for CSI. School improvement funds may not be expended at or on behalf of schools not eligible for CSI. And in addition, school improvement funds for CSI may not be used to hire additional permanent staff. So the SIPSA for CSI template consolidates all school-level planning efforts into one plan for programs funded through the CONAP and for the federal support category CSI. And this is pursuant to Ed Code Section 64001 and the Every Student Succeeds Act. This template is designed to meet the school-wide program planning requirements for both the SIPSA and federal CSI planning requirements. So we're going to use this SIPSA for CSI template for a side-by-side comparison of the template and the instructions to show how, when completed consistent with the instructions, the plan will meet all federal planning requirements. To begin highlighting how the instructions and prompts address the CSI requirements, let's take a look at the plan description section of the SIPSA for CSI template. In the template, the plan description section prompts the writer to briefly describe the school's plan for effectively meeting the ESSA's planning requirements for CSI in alignment with the LCAP and other federal, state, and local programs. The instructions also remind the writer to make sure to call out that this plan will be used to meet those requirements. Navigating through the SIPSA for CSI template, we notice that all the required sections for the SIPSA only template are included, each with their additional CSI planning requirements embedded in the instructions. We also have one added section, the identification of resource inequities, a requirement of school improvement programs. CSI planning requirements include that schools eligible for CSI must identify resource inequities, which may include a review of LEA and school-level budgeting as a part of the required school-level needs assessment. Some examples of resource inequities may include lower quality books and instructional materials, less access to laboratories, outdated computers, significantly larger class sizes, or less qualified or experienced teachers. Identification of resource inequities may involve the identification of current strategies and practices that are contributing factors to the identified inequities. The identified resource inequities must be addressed through the implementation of the CSI plan and addressed in the SIPSA. And speaking of the needs assessment, completing this section fully as indicated in the instructions successfully addresses all relevant planning requirements for CSI. The same can be said with the identified needs section. So we start to see how adherence to the instructions is beneficial in meeting the requirements for CSI. The other required section that we have on this slide is the goals, strategies, activities, and expenditures section. When completing this section to meet federal planning requirements for CSI, improvement goals must align with the goals, actions, and services in the LEA's LCAP. Shifting over to our goals and identified need, again, completing this section as described in the instructions will fully address all relevant federal CSI planning requirements. And finally, let's talk about the metrics and/or state indicators that the LEAs will use in the annual measurable outcomes section. This section calls for the identification of metrics and/or state indicators that the school will use as a means of evaluating progress towards accomplishing the goal. The school may identify metrics for specific student groups. However, for CSI compliance, the school must include school-level metrics related to the metrics that led to the school's eligibility for CSI. And on this slide, we've included this chart as a resource to help identify where in the SIPSA for CSI template we can find the requirements of a CSI plan. Again, we want to emphasize that adherence to the instructions will ensure that our plans meet all federal planning requirements for CSI. And for our colleagues from single school districts and charter schools, single school districts and charter schools that are eligible for CSI must develop a SIPSA that addresses the applicable requirements as a condition of receiving funds. However, a single school district or a charter school may streamline the process by combining state and federal requirements into one document, which may include the LCAP and all federal planning requirements, provided that the combined plan is able to demonstrate that the legal requirements for each of the plans are met. So planning requirements for single school districts and charter schools choosing to exercise this option are available in the LCAP instructions. And to close out our section, we have a screenshot and a link to the SIPSA for ATSI template and instructions. This template is designed to meet school-wide program planning requirements for both the SIPSA and federal ATSI planning requirements. It's important to note, LEAs with schools that meet ATSI eligibility criteria are not eligible to receive school improvement funding. Therefore, CSI funds shall not be used at or on behalf of schools eligible for ATSI. And with that, Debbie and I conclude our section, and we'll hand it off to Jeannie and Helen for our LCAP update. Take it away, ladies.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Our LCAP section this morning provides an update for funding for equity multiplier school sites, takes a closer look at how comprehensive support and improvement plans are addressed in the LCAP, and offers a closer look at determining metrics for local indicators in the LCAP. Next slide, please. So this week, the CDE sent LEAs the 2023-24 First Principal Apportionment Letter. And included in this letter is information for the calculation and allocation of equity multiplier funding, which provides additional funding to LEAs for allocation to school sites meeting non-stability and socioeconomically disadvantaged pupil thresholds in the prior year. This funding must be used to provide evidence-based services and supports for students at these school sites. LEAs are required to document the efforts to improve outcomes for students at these school sites, beginning with the 24-25 Local Control and Accountability Plan. The screenshots on the slide show specific connections to the LCAP template and school sites eligible for this funding. In the plan summary section, LEAs will identify all schools eligible for equity multiplier funding. In the Engaging Educational Partners section, LEAs describe their process for consulting with educational partners at each of the schools generating this funding in developing the required focus goal or goals for each of the eligible schools, which are developed and documented in the Goals and Actions section of the LCAP template. Next slide, please. So building on what you heard this morning about the Comprehensive Support and Improvement Plan for eligible schools, we will take a look now at the connection to the LCAP template. So there are 3 CSI prompts in the LCAP that address the LEA's obligation to partner with schools and its educational partners to support the development of CSI plans and the LEA's process to support the schools with implementation and monitoring the effectiveness of the eligible schools' CSI plans. So we'll take a closer look at each of these. As you heard this morning, schools eligible for CSI per the Every Student Succeeds Act are identified using the California dashboard data to determine school eligibility for and exit criteria from CSI. School eligibility and exit criteria are determined for low graduation rate and identifying not less than the lowest performing 5% of Title I funded schools. In the LCAP plan summary section, LEAs identify their eligible schools in the first prompt in the CSI section in the plan summary. This list needs to include the schools identified in the ESSA Assistance Status spreadsheet. In the second prompt, LEAs address how the LEA has or will support the identified schools in developing CSI plans. Here, the LEAs describe their process for supporting schools to address school planning requirements in the development and implementation of their CSI plan. From the instructions, you will see the response requires a description of how the LEA has or will support the eligible schools to conduct and engage their educational partners in a school-level needs assessment. Additionally, LEAs will describe how they have or will support the schools to consider and identify evidence-based interventions to address their needs, and the process the LEA used or will use to support the eligible schools to identify any resource inequities to be addressed through the implementation of the CSI plan. So, in addition to directing your attention to what is required in the template instructions, the slide offers links for guidance from the Department of Education addressing evidence-based interventions and resources from the Alliance for Equity, offering ways to look at multiple dimensions of equity. And this can be helpful in identifying areas of resource inequity that need to be addressed in the CSI plan. The final prompt in this section addresses how the LEA will support the CSI school or the schools to monitor and evaluate their implementation and effectiveness of their CSI plan to support student group and school level improvement. Next slide, please. So for single school districts and charter schools, the first prompt does not apply because they are the only entity. For prompts 2 and 3, the school needs to address the same school planning elements from the LCAP instructions that apply for their school. So in the support for the identified schools section, the school will address their process for engaging with educational partners in a needs assessment to inform their CSI plan. Additionally, the school will describe how they considered and identified evidence-based interventions to address their needs and the process the school used to identify any resource inequities to be addressed through the implementation of their CSI plan. So while the prompts are not phrased for single school districts, the 3 requirements included in the instructions apply to each of the schools eligible for CSI. Next slide, please. And so here we provide a flow chart that starts with the connection between the LCAP prompts and the CSI plan, and then provides the next steps for the CSI approval process following adoption and submission to the County Office of Education. After completing the CSI plan or plans, the school district, single school district, or charter school completes the CSI prompts we just reviewed in the LCAP template. Next, County Offices of Education review and approve the CSI prompts within the LCAP. As part of the review process for the complete LCAP for school districts, CSI prompts are reviewed. For charter schools, only the CSI prompts in the LCAP are reviewed and approved. County offices then provide a list of LEAs who have approved CSI prompts, and this list is sent to the CDE. And CDE provides the list of LEAs with approved prompts to the State Board of Education for their final approval. Helen will now address CSI in the LCAP for LEAs with dashboard alternative school status.
Thank you, Jeannie. This part of the CSI and LCAP, I will be discussing dashboard alternative school status schools, or what's known as DAS. So what is DAS school? DAS schools are California's alternative schools. They serve our highest risk students, usually in settings such as continuation schools, community day schools, or juvenile court schools. At the September 2022 State Board meeting, changes and flexibilities were approved for DOS schools eligible for CSI. DOS schools that meet eligibility for CSI low graduation rate and CSI low performing will be referred as DOS Communities of Practice or DOS COP schools. We love acronyms, right? The CDE is committed to supporting DOS schools by distinguishing the uniqueness of these schools and the students that they serve. So what's the first flexibility for DOS COP school? So LEAs with DOS COP schools identified under CSI low graduation rate criteria with less than 100 students enrolled has the option to forego implementation of all CSI related improvement activities. For LEAs that exercise this flexibility, they do not have to develop or implement a CSI plan for its DOS COP schools for the low graduation rate criteria. They will also forego CSI funding associated with that school. The LEAs are strongly encouraged to collaborate with educational partners when making this decision. So as mentioned, DOS COP schools, again, eligible under CSI low graduation rate with less than 100 students that chooses to forego the improvement activities and the CSI funds, the response to CSI prompts are not required. But for transparency purposes, the standardized statement in the pink box must be included in the prompt 1 of the CSI prompts in the LCAP. The second flexibility based on SS Section 111D 1CI, any LEA with DOS COP schools identified under CSI low graduation rate criteria, regardless of the number of students enrolled, has the option to use the LCAP to meet its CSI planning requirements. So for the LEA that choose this option, they must ensure that it addresses each of the CSI planning requirements within the LCAP as discussed previously. So to review, remember they include the development of the plan in partnership with schools and educational partners, including principals, teachers, and parents. It's grounded in school-level needs assessment and informed by state indicators, including student performance against state-determined long-term goals. The plan includes evidence-based interventions and identifies resource inequities through a review of LEA and school-level budgeting. The LEAs have the flexibility in determining how best to address each of the CSI plan requirements within the LCAP. So to support LEA school planning efforts for single school districts, charter schools, and LEAs with DOS COP schools eligible under CSI low graduation rate criteria, the CDE developed CSI planning summary webpage, and the link is included in the slide. That explains how to use the LCAP to meet the CSI planning requirements as we stated in the previous slide. Additionally, LEAs with schools that meet the criteria for CSI will continue to complete the CSI prompts located in the plan summary of the LCAP as applicable. So more information on this can be found on the DOS COP tab, and the link is included on this slide, and more on CDE's continuous improvement resources are also included on this slide. Next, Jeannie will transition to LCAP updates on metrics.
Thanks, Helen. So today we're going to share some information about the format for including metrics in the LCAP and offer some options for LEAs to consider for metrics that address the local indicators. So for your reference, we have included the LCAP metrics inventory tool, which includes the required metrics for the state priority areas. We really thank our colleagues in the assessment and data literacy unit for working with us and developing this really helpful resource. And so in addition to the inventory checklist of primary data sources and the corresponding CalPADS reports for metrics in the state priority areas, The tool has been updated to include additional data considerations that provide clarity and further insight into certain measures, as well as considerations for metrics for the local indicators. And the metrics for the local indicators are metrics where data is not uniformly collected statewide. And so as LEAs are determining metrics to include in their plan and determining effectiveness of actions in the current year LCAP and preparing to monitor effectiveness of actions moving forward, it's essential to identify what metrics the LEA will use over the 3-year LCAP cycle so they can measure and monitor the impact of their actions for all student groups. And so key to this is determining a baseline and a consistent data source from which the LEA can annually collect data for the 3-year cycle, so LEAs can really measure and monitor the impact of their efforts. So going on to the next slide. When including metrics for local indicators, LEAs have options to consider what data they are looking at to inform their narratives or the ratings reported on the California dashboard. It is important to consider what your LEA will measure that connects to the goals and actions in your LCAP that address the state priority areas where data is not uniformly collected. These are also known as local indicators. And so included on the slide are multiple questions to consider for metrics for the local indicator being addressed by a goal in the LCAP. For example, does the metric align to the state priority area identified for the goal? If the goal is addressing state priority 1, do the metrics connect to the required component for the basic services priority area? Is each metric specific and measurable? And is there a consistent data source that can be accessed annually to show the impact of the actions in the goal in each of the 3 years in the LCAP? At the bottom of the slide, you see a screenshot that indicates standard met for the local indicator in the baseline column. And we've included multiple local indicators just for the purpose of illustration. And so this statement at the bottom of the slide does not indicate baseline information or what is being measured. This statement is reported on the dashboard to indicate that the LEA has reported the local indicator information to the board or governing body. And so in the next few slides, we will share with you some considerations for determining what your LEA will use to measure for a few of the local indicators. So here we're looking at state priority 1. And this one can be a little bit confusing as we are moving toward a more consistent teacher assignment monitoring system. So at this time, LEAs will need to indicate a metric to reflect the degree to which LEAs teachers are appropriately assigned and fully credentialed, and the data source still remains a local decision. You can see here from the dashboard that data that reflects teacher assignment monitoring data. While this data reflects assignment monitoring data from the 21-22 school year, which is a ways back, an LEA may have more current data before their LCAP goes to adoption. And this could be either teacher assignment monitoring data for the 22-23 school year that may be released by the state prior to LCAP adoption, or it could be other locally collected data. In either of these cases, the LEA may want to consider updating their baseline data and target outcome to reflect the most current data available. And so it's really going to be the LEA's call to determine what data they choose to include. But it's important to keep in mind that this teacher assignment monitoring outcome data is going to be included in the dashboard. Moving on to the next slide, we'll take a look at a sample. So in this sample, you can see the data source for the metric is the DataQuest Teacher Assignment Monitoring report. And the baseline identifies the year of the data collection. Okay? If this data is updated prior to LCAP adoption, the most current data could be used and this information could be updated. And so on the next slide, some additional considerations for priority 1. What we're trying to share here is that it's really going to be each LEA's call based on closely working with the HR office to determine the data source that the LEA will access consistently for the duration of the 3-year LCAP cycle. And also, given that the teacher assignment monitoring outcomes will continue to be included on the dashboard, it may be more clear for your educational partners if the data source your LEA selects aligns to the same definitions for the data elements that are reported on the dashboard. And now Helen's going to take a look at local indicator for priority 7.
Thank you, Jeannie. So priority 7, which is pupil enrollment in broad course of study, includes that all subject areas are described in Educational Code Section 51210 and Section 51220 as related to curriculum, equity, and professional learning. And for consistency, LEA should consider selecting 23-24 data from the locally determined measures that the LEA is using to inform the narrative or the self-reflection tool for priority 7, access to broad course of study. So examples of this data could include enrollment in courses and programs such as advanced placement, dual enrollment, AVID, CTE, GATE, IB, or VAPA. So in looking at the sample provided on the slide, it's evident that the metrics are organized by grade level spans, namely elementary, middle, and high school. Each metric is clearly identified, indicating the number of schools or the percentage of students enrolled. In this example, let's say that metric 1 is linked to a contributing action. Therefore, the data is disaggregated for all students as well as unduplicated student groups such as low income, foster youth, and English learners in the 11th and in 12th grade. The target for year 3 outcome is clearly defined with achievable percentages and numbers over the course of the 3-year cycle. Additionally, the sample includes enrollment data for chorus and instrumental music programs at the middle school level. And again, all data is aggregated for all students and unduplicated student groups. Furthermore, for elementary schools, the offering of STEM programs are measured as baseline data. So for priority 8, which is dedicated to measuring other pupil outcomes, involves assessing pupil performance across various subject areas as related to, again, curriculum, equity, and professional learning. Examples of these outcomes include the State Seal of Biliteracy, Gold State Seal Merit Diploma, National Merit Scholars, as well as CTE internships and certifications. So let's take a look at a sample. So as we examine the sample metric for pupil outcomes for high school, the metric used is the percentage of graduates awarded the State Seal of Biliteracy. The data is sourced from the College and Career Level and Measures Report from the California Dashboard, which provides comprehensive statistics for all students and other applicable student groups. Similarly, for middle and elementary schools, We gauge pupil outcomes by measuring the percentage of students meeting literacy benchmarks with clear sourcing of data as provided. And I'm going to echo what Jeannie said. Consistency in data sourcing is essential for LEAs to accurately track progress and effectiveness over the 3-year cycle. All the sample metrics shared today is in the link provided on the sample metric slides. So let's take a minute to stop and check for understanding. So I'm going to say the question, and we're going to use the chat function. Does standard met for local indicators as baseline and target for year 3 outcome data for priorities 1, 2, 3, 6, and or 7 indicate what the LEA is measuring? Yes or no? Place your answer in the chat. And notice again that standard met refers to what is being displayed on the California dashboard for local indicators. We have a great crowd. You guys are awesome, amazing. That's right. It is no. Merely stating standard met or not met within the local indicator metric does not indicate what is being measured. For the purposes of the California dashboard, the designation of standard met indicates that the local indicator presentation has been made to the board. It's crucial to remember that metrics should align with state priority areas and accurately gauge the impact of actions related to goals. Each metric should be specific and measurable and supported by the latest baseline data corresponding to the school year. And again, consistency in metric source for baseline, yearly outcomes, and target for year 3 outcome is essential. In our upcoming meeting next month, we'll share additional local indicator sample metrics. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to Rachel to continue with equitable services consultation. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone. So as Helen mentioned in this next section, we have a brief refresher on the equitable services consultation process, as districts are now beginning this process for 2024-25 services. So ESSA requires that access to equitable services be offered to eligible private school students, their families, teachers, and other educational personnel. However, keep in mind that participation by private schools is not required. Services provided must be equitable to those services provided to public school students and teachers participating in the program. Now, the services can be different from those services provided to public school participants because the services are based on the specific needs of private school students and teachers. It's also important to note that services provided must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological. And services must also supplement and in no case supplant the basic level of services that the private school is responsible for providing to their students, staff, and parents. And then additionally, funds may not be provided directly to a private school. So this slide here highlights the federal programs that equitable services requirements apply to. And so that includes Title I, Parts A and C, Title II, Part A, Title III, Part A, Title IV, Parts A and B, and also Project SERVE under ESSA. An important thing to remember is that funds for equitable services must be obligated in the fiscal year that funds are received. And this is to ensure that eligible private school participants receive the services that they are entitled to in a timely manner. Another important thing to note is that the school district is responsible for retaining the control of funds for equitable services. So this means that any materials, equipment, and property purchased with funds for equitable services belongs to the school district and also must be included on the district inventory. Materials or equipment purchased for equitable services are for use during the fiscal year, during that specific fiscal year, and should also be collected at the end of the year. If the private school wants to use the materials or equipment again the following year, then that's something that must be determined during the consultation process. And also it must be based on the needs of the students. Additionally, any materials or equipment must be purchased directly by the school district and also received by a district employee. So that means that materials or equipment should not be sent directly to the private school from the vendor. And private school officials should never sign for the delivery of materials. Equitable services must also be provided by either an employee of the school district or through a third-party contractor. And the employment or contract must be under the control and supervision of the school district. So this means that all contracts must be negotiated and agreed to by the school district. So private school officials should never be the one to sign a contract with a third-party contractor or vendor. So only private schools that are nonprofit and have submitted an affidavit to the CDE may participate in equitable services. And so there are a few ways to access the list of eligible private schools. And so we've included 2 links on the slide for you. The first link will take you to the CDE website where you can access a list of all private schools with an affidavit on file. The second link is a searchable database that allows a search by district for the private schools located within the district's boundaries. A county password is required to access the second database, and so we've included the password for LA County on the slide. Other counties must contact the CDE private school office for their specific county password. It's also important to note that we've previously heard that the CDE updates the private school list in March. So if you've already checked the list or database to get started on the consultation process for next year's services, be sure to check it again in case any additional schools were added. And then another thing to keep in mind is that the CDE does not verify the accuracy of information on the affidavits. The CDE expects districts to verify the accuracy of student enrollment data and tax-exempt status through the consultation process. So as you're consulting with private school officials, be sure to verify this information. In terms of private school participation, the requirements for Title I Part A are different than that of the other title programs. So for Title I Part A, nonprofit private schools, both within and outside of the district's boundaries, may be eligible to participate. And that's because funding and services are based on the student's residence in a Title I school attendance area. So for example, if you have low-income students who live in Title I school attendance areas in your district, but they attend nonprofit private schools outside of your district boundaries, these students would generate funds for Title I services. It's also important to remember that poverty does not determine who actually receives the Title I services. So to be eligible for Title I services, private school students must first live in a Title I school attendance area, and second, be failing or most at risk of failing based on multiple educationally related criteria that's agreed upon during the consultation process. Now for the other title programs, so for Title I Part C, Titles II, III, and IV, only nonprofit private schools located within the district boundaries may participate. So LEAs are required to consult with private school officials regarding equitable services. And so keep in mind that consultation is the responsibility of the school district. So it's up to the district to annually initiate.
What multilingual recognition? That's sealed by literacy?
It's up to the district to annually initiate this contact with the private schools. And so the first step in the consultation process is to identify eligible nonprofit private schools. And so this was highlighted on the previous 2 slides. The district must then contact those nonprofit private schools to make them aware of the programs and services for which their students and staff may be eligible. So again, for Title I, Part C, and Titles 2, 3, and 4, it would be those private schools located within your district boundaries. And for Title I, Part A, you would contact private schools within your district boundaries, as well as private schools in adjoining districts to determine if they have eligible students enrolled. Now, most districts use an intent to participate letter to make that initial contact with private schools. And it's usually at this time of the year that districts start reaching out to private schools to begin that consultation process for next year's services. And so, as mentioned, LEAs must initiate contact with private schools on an annual basis. However, keep in mind that consultation involves ongoing discussions and meetings with private school officials on key topics related to the provision of equitable services. And the goal of consultation is agreement between the district and private school officials on how to provide equitable and effective programs and services for private school participants. And then the results of this agreement are reported to the Ombudsman through the spring CONAP submission, which is typically due in June. So consultation with private school officials must be timely and meaningful. So that means it must begin early enough to prepare for the next school year. And consultation must occur during the design and the development of programs and before the district makes any decision that can impact the participation of private school students, teachers, other educational personnel, and families. And consultation must also be ongoing throughout the year to ensure effective implementation and also the evaluation of services. And so there are required topics that must be addressed during the consultation process. So for example, some of these topics include how the needs of private school students and teachers will be identified, what services will be offered, and how the services will be assessed. It's also important to keep in mind that a unilateral offer of services by a district without the opportunity for discussion is not considered adequate consultation. The consultation process must provide an opportunity for the private school officials to express their views and also to have those views considered. So here we see some examples of documentation that districts must maintain. And so districts must maintain this documentation to verify that it has met the requirement for timely and meaningful consultation and that it has provided equitable services. So some examples include intent to participate letters, the written affirmation of consultation, and also evidence of consultation attempts. It's important for districts to maintain documentation of outreach to the private schools. So for example, anything mailed should be sent via certified mail. And if you email items, that you should send them with the red receipts. And then other documentation that should be maintained include meeting agendas and minutes, any data collected to assess or evaluate services, service agreements with contractors or third-party providers, monitoring and assessment tools, any inventory list for materials or equipment purchased, and then also identification criteria for student eligibility for Title I services. And then also, if the district disagrees with the private school officials on any topic that's discussed during the consultation process, the district is required to provide in writing to the private school officials the reasons why the district disagrees. And so if there are any written explanations of disagreement, this must also be kept on file by the district. And so here we just see some screenshots of the CDE's intent to participate and written affirmation forms. And so at the bottom of the slide, we've included links to these sample documents. And so as mentioned, most districts use some sort of intent to participate letter or form when making that initial contact with private schools. And so really the consultation process is initiated annually when the district reaches out to the private schools to explain the intent and purposes of the applicable federal programs that their students and staff may be eligible to participate in. And so it's important to obtain a copy of the intent to participate form from each private school, whether or not they intend to participate in equitable services. And it's also a good idea to include a deadline by which they need to respond. And so you would then begin the consultation process with private schools that have indicated their intent to participate. So the written affirmation, districts are required to maintain this form in its records, and it must be signed by each nonprofit private school to document that timely and meaningful consultation has occurred. And so keep in mind that the form, on the form, private school officials must also have the option to indicate their belief that timely and meaningful consultation has not occurred, or that the program design for private school participants is not equitable. And so this information will also be reported to the CDE through the nonprofit private school consultation page with the spring CONAP submission in June. So here we see a sample private school consultation timeline that has been adapted from a sample CDE timeline. And so we've included the link to the CDE sample at the bottom of the slide for your reference. And it's recommended that districts begin the consultation process for next year's services in February. And this is to ensure that services begin in a timely manner. And as previously mentioned, consultation should be ongoing throughout the year. And so you'll see on the timeline that there may be times during the year where districts are consulting with private school officials on both the current year services as well as next year's services. So here we've included a screenshot of the nonprofit private school consultation page that gets submitted with the spring CONAP that was mentioned. So on this form, LEAs are asked to indicate for each nonprofit private school if consultation occurred. Also, if consultation agreement was met. If there is a signed written affirmation on file, and then also must provide a consultation code indicating the private school's belief that timely and meaningful consultation has or has not occurred, or if the program design is not equitable. So keep in mind as you're beginning the consultation process with private schools for programs and services for next year, so for the 2024-25 school year, you'll be reporting this information to the CDE through the spring CONAP submission in June. And so here we've included some links to some resources on equitable services. So the first is a link to CDE's Equitable Services Ombudsman webpage. And this page has quite a few resources. So it has frequently asked questions, links to the Equitable Services web pages for all of the title programs, and also the method for calculating the equitable services proportional share for each of the applicable title programs. And then we've also included the links to the updated Title I Equitable Services Non-Regulatory Guidance, as well as the new Title VIII Equitable Services Non-Regulatory Guidance, which applies to the other federal programs, such as Titles II, III, and IV. And then lastly, we wanted to share that we are offering an equitable services workshop on March 5th. And so during this workshop, we'll be going more in depth on the equitable services requirements, including specific requirements for each of the federal programs. So for Titles I, II, III, and IV. And then the registration link is included on the slide for those interested. So in this next section, before we close out the meeting, we just have a few reminders. And so the first reminder is regarding the revised capital expenditures pre-approval application form. And so the CDE recently announced that they have revised this application form for federal stimulus funds. So this would apply to your ESSER 3 funds that must be obligated by September 30th, 2024. And so CDE indicated that the application was revised to facilitate the review process and to also clarify guidance for the allowable use of funds. So starting March 4th, all capital expenditure pre-approval applications submitted must use the revised form. And so applications submitted on older versions of the form will be returned for revision before CDE reviews the application. And so just as a reminder, prior approval from CDE is required for any capital expenditure single big ticket purchases that cost more than $5,000. And that would be using ESSER 3 funds. And so these purchases might include general purpose equipment, buildings, and land, including material improvements, and any related expenses. And then lastly, we've included some upcoming deadlines on this slide. And so some of these deadlines we shared last month, but we've added a few to the list. So specifically the last two, we added the 2023-24 CSI application for funding deadline. So that's coming up on March 4th. And then also the 2022-23 ESSA per pupil expenditure reporting. And this is due by March 1st. And we've also included the applicable web links in case you need any additional information on any of these upcoming deadlines. And so that concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be March 28th. And so we want to thank you all for joining us today. And so please remember to complete the evaluation for today's meeting. And if you have any additional questions for us, please leave them in the chat and we will respond in our Q&A follow-up document. So thank you again for joining us today.